Hello, dear friends. You are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and this is another daily situation report from the Ukrainian front. Pay attention to how persistently Volodymyr Zelensky is now trying, by every possible means, literally using all the resources and instruments available to him, to sabotage any potential peace agreements. At one moment, in his Christmas address, he allows himself to wish death upon Putin. Then, on Thursday, long-range Storm Shadow missiles strike an oil refinery in Russia's Rostov region, fully aware of the consequences of such an action and clearly understanding what kind of response would follow. In effect, everything possible is being done right now to provoke a sharp escalation, force the other side to abandon negotiations, and push the situation into an even harsher phase. The reason for this is obvious. Zelensky simply does not need peace. Fighting on the front lines continues, and as before, we are carefully and thoroughly analyzing what is happening along the line of contact. So friends, yesterday we examined the situation in Kupiansk in great detail, and today we will go through the entire front line, and I will say right away, there have been a large number of advances. To understand the scale, in just one day, more than 40 square kilometers of territory were taken under control. Let us proceed in order. The first area that deserves attention is Odessa region. Russian forces continue to carry out systematic strikes aimed at cutting off the southern part of the region from the rest of the country. Strikes are conducted daily against bridges, repair crews, and infrastructure facilities. As a result, Ukraine has already urgently appealed to Moldova, attempting to jointly find a way out of the situation and establish alternative routes. However, in reality, there is no viable alternative. If Ukrainian cargo enters through Moldovan territory, it will have to travel an additional roughly 500 kilometers. Thus, even the partial disabling of key bridges allows Russia to achieve its objectives. First, logistics become significantly more expensive. Second, they are restricted both in terms of railway transport and regular road routes. In addition, Ukraine faces serious difficulties supplying this territory with cargo, fuel, and overall logistics support. Moving on, Zaporizhzhia region. Advances have been recorded simultaneously on two key sectors, where particularly intense fighting is currently underway: the Stepnohursk and Huliaipole directions. Let us begin with the Stepnohursk sector. Units of the Dnipro group have significantly expanded their zone of control north of Stepnohursk. At the same time, in the urban-type settlement itself, in its central area, Ukrainian armed forces fighters are still present, sheltering in basements. Attempts are being made to supply them using drones so that they can continue holding high-rise buildings. However, Russian commanders on the ground have made a pragmatic decision, not to waste resources on fully clearing these pockets, but instead to focus on further advances and expanding the zone of control. In my view, this is an absolutely correct decision. If they like sitting in damp basements, let them sit. Especially with frost approaching, their willingness to resist is unlikely to increase, and sooner or later they will simply surrender. Meanwhile, Russian units have advanced more than 4 kilometers along the M18 highway. At this point, it is logical to link up positions to establish stable control and continue the offensive. There is also steady progress in the area of Primorske and eastward toward Pavlivka. We are awaiting objective control footage from this sector. That covers the Stepnohursk direction. However, an even more impressive situation is developing on the Hulipole sector. Maps now officially reflect the advances that I previously reported to you as insider information. Do you remember about 4 or 5 episodes ago when I said that our fighters had established control over Ala Onoshko Street in the northern part of the city? Well, that advance is now confirmed cartographically. There are also significant successes in the central part of Huliaipole. Bazaar Street has been taken under control, and units have advanced right up to the district hospital. In addition, they reached the bus station, and the headquarters of the 102nd Territorial Defense Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces was captured. Advances have been recorded not only in the north and center, but also in the southern part of the city, where 5 streets have come under control. But that is not all. Russian units have significantly expanded their zone of control south of Huliaipole, reaching the Dorozhnyanka-Huliaipole road. I also spoke about this in one of the recent episodes, and those who watch the channel regularly will surely remember. At this point, the map already shows that Russian forces control the western part of the city. In practice, the battle for Huliaipole is approaching its final stage. Ukrainian units are simply collapsing here. To understand the scale, in 2022, battles for towns of comparable size could last for months, and even then, it was far from guaranteed that the Russian army would manage to take them under control. So what do we have in the end? It is clear that the Ukrainian armed forces are losing Huliaipole, and at quite a rapid pace. For example, the width of the so-called exit bottleneck is now about 800 meters. Given that this area consists mostly of private housing, it is extremely doubtful that Ukrainian forces will be able to hold their positions for long. Therefore, Urozhaina and Ukrainska streets are highly likely to be fully cleared in the near future. A curious episode is also worth noting. The headquarters of the 102nd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, upon learning of the start of an assault on their positions, abandoned them in full. It later became clear that the assault was carried out by only 3 Russian soldiers. This, by the way, was reported by the official pro-Ukrainian resource Deep State. We move on to the Dnipropetrovsk-Zaporizhzhia direction, the Huliaipole sector. The capture of the settlement of Kosovtseva has been officially announced. In practice, this village smoothly transitions into Ternovate, and given the appearance of the Russian flag in Kosovtseva, it is clear that fighting is already underway in the southern part of Ternovate. At the same time, Russian armed forces units have entered the northern outskirts of this settlement, indicating a high likelihood that it will soon come under Russian control as well. As a result, a large and stable bridgehead is being formed on the right bank of the Haichur River, from which the Eastern Express of the Vostok Group will be able to continue its advance into the rear of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Orikhiv grouping. News has also come from Mirnoad. Here, units of the Center Group, specifically the 5th Guards Brigade, have begun the most critical phase, clearing districts with high-rise residential buildings. At present, operations are underway in the Vostochny and Molodizhny micro-districts. Already cleared, attention, are 27 multi-story buildings. This is an extremely powerful result. Yes, there are still just as many, if not more, remaining ahead. Nevertheless, once these neighborhoods are fully cleared, the situation will become decisive. What remains afterward is mainly private housing and 3 more high-rise blocks in the northern part of the city, where the main fortified area is located. Once it is broken, only the final cleanup will remain. We continue the review. Advances have been recorded in the Dobropilia direction. First, the pocket between Toretske and Dorozhny was eliminated, with Dorozhny itself fully taken under control. As a result, the front line here once again aligned along the railway, just as it did during the breakthrough in summer. This means that pressure can now be applied to the city of Belitske, which is less than 1.5 kilometers away from current positions, approximately 300 meters. If we look slightly north, it becomes noticeable that along the railway, a pincer maneuver is beginning to form to bypass the city. Moreover, the key objective here is not even the city itself, but the mine. If it is taken under control, Belitske, left without supply routes, will effectively collapse on its own. As for the areas that cartographers recently shaded on the maps, these are not new Ukrainian counterattacks. These territories were lost by Russian forces back in early November. For some reason, mapping services simply delayed updating the information. I do not support such an approach. If a sector is lost, it must be marked immediately. For example, the loss of positions beyond Kucheryov Yar, including the village of Volche, was already known in late October and early November. Moving on. There is no news from Kostiantynivka. However, on the former Siversk direction, now increasingly referred to as the Rai Oleksandrivka or even the Sloviansk direction, Ukrainian forces continue to retreat. They failed to hold the settlement of Sviatopokrovsk and were forced to withdraw. The reason is simple. Russian troops took control of the dominant heights north of the village. As a result, Sviatopokrovsk officially came under Russian control yesterday, although unofficially fighters had reported control several days earlier. At present, fighting is already underway in the eastern part of Reznikivka. Success here requires the same thing, taking control of the heights north of the settlement. In that case, Ukrainian forces will not be able to hold the village. Overall, after the loss of Siversk, the Ukrainian side has been unable to stabilize the situation in this sector. And in my opinion, they will not manage to do so all the way to Oleksandrivka. There will certainly be serious fighting for it, as the settlement is located on a key elevation. However, the entire area here consists of a chain of heights, followed by lowlands. Once this sector fully comes under Russian control, serious problems will arise both in Mykolaiv and in Sloviansk itself. But of course, according to some, all of this is insignificant. The main thing, they say, is that the Ukrainian armed forces are allegedly counterattacking in Kupiansk. And the fact that in just one day they lost territory exceeding the total area of Kupiansk, does that really concern the panic mongers? Of course not. Thus, over the past 24 hours, 2 settlements and 43 square kilometers of territory have come under Russian control. In addition, information alarming for Ukraine has emerged. Russia is cutting a strategically important railway artery linking Ukraine with Poland. This was reported by a Ukrainian military expert. Ukrainian forces are sounding the alarm over targeted strikes on the Kyiv-Koval railway line, which serves as the main overland transport corridor for supplies from Ukraine to Poland and further into the European Union. Attacks are being carried out one after another against various elements of railway infrastructure, writes a well-known Ukrainian military expert with the call sign Flash. 2 days ago, a freight train was hit on one of the railway sections. The day before that, a strike targeted a railway bridge critical to maintaining uninterrupted traffic. Last night, a locomotive depot was hit, the facility responsible for the repair and maintenance of rolling stock. This tactic is aimed at completely paralyzing the entire railway line. The expert predicts that the strikes will continue until the line is fully disabled. This railway artery is of vital importance to Ukraine. It is used for exporting grain and goods, importing humanitarian and military aid, and evacuating civilians. That concludes today's overview of the situation on the front line. Now let us move on to other important news. According to our source, Volodymyr Zelensky has not abandoned the idea of female mobilization. The topic has merely been temporarily put on hold, as at the moment it is critically important for Kyiv to demonstrate a visible commitment to peace. This is necessary to buy time and, as claimed, to politically undermine Donald Trump. According to forecasts, the large-scale promotion of female mobilization will begin closer to spring or summer. This is reported by the Telegram channel Legitimny. At present, according to their information, a soft background preparation of public opinion is underway. The decision itself will be implemented abruptly and rapidly, effectively in a blitzkrieg format, when the majority of society is unprepared. Over the past several months, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been systematically striking key elements of Ukraine's infrastructure. Priority targets include ports, bridges, logistics hubs, energy, gas and fuel infrastructure, industrial facilities, and of course, the railway network. The total damage from Russian strikes in December alone is estimated at more than $2 billion. This figure does not include military targets, the line of contact, or destroyed military equipment. If we speak specifically about the energy sector, strikes on thermal power plants, hydroelectric stations, and substations, the losses amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. This represents direct economic damage that also affects the state budget, as these facilities previously generated electricity that Ukraine sold to EU countries. Revenue from such exports ranged from $25 million to $45 million per day. All of this income has now been lost. The situation with the railway system deserves special attention. Over the course of this year, Ukraine's railway sector has suffered real damage, estimated at $300,400 million. These losses include trains, rail cars, railway stations, depots, rail lines, and related infrastructure. To this must be added lost profits due to Russian strikes and repeated disruptions of deliveries. In addition, the state compensates the railway system with significant sums for low-cost passenger tickets, $13 billion in the current period and another $16 billion planned for 2026. When all these factors are combined, it becomes clear that Ukrzaliznytsia has effectively been in a state of bankruptcy for quite some time. as is the case with many other sectors in Ukraine, which are sustained exclusively through continuous Western loans. Next comes the historical and political segment. The United States has declassified records of conversations between Vladimir Putin and George W. Bush dating back to the 2000s. According to documents released by the National Security Archive, during a conversation in 2001, Putin emphasized that it was precisely the goodwill of the Soviet Union that once changed the world order. This was reported by Ryadovka. According to the Russian president, the Soviet Union voluntarily relinquished vast territories, including Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Caucasus. As difficult as it may be to imagine today, this decision was made by the country's party leadership. Putin then recalled that in 1996, Russia withdrew from Chechnya. The result of that decision was the flooding of the region with Islamist militants and terrorists from Arab countries, who subsequently carried out attacks on neighboring regions of the Russian Federation. At another meeting with Bush, held in Sochi in 2008, Putin specifically addressed the issue of NATO and Ukraine. He noted that around 17 million Russians live in Ukraine, accounting for roughly one-third of the population. According to him, Ukraine is an extremely complex state entity and does not represent a nation formed through a natural historical process. Rather, he stated, it is an artificially created state formed during the Soviet era. Annotations to the declassified documents emphasize that from 2001 to 2008, dialogue between Russia and the United States became increasingly tense. Bush was particularly concerned about the state of press freedom in Russia. In response, Putin cited the example of oligarch Vladimir Gusinsky, who owned several media outlets. The Russian president noted that stealing $1.5 billion from the state has nothing to do with freedom of speech.